In Bronny James's world, the doubt has always been the same, that he's only in the NBA because of the name on his jersey.
One of the smaller guys on the floor, guarding the tallest guy in the league, so it's definitely a challenge, but I'm up for anything.
Then on November 5, 2025, he faced off against Victor Wembanyama, a 7'4" frame over a 6'2" guard, and then Wembanyama got in front of a camera and said the part everyone had been thinking out loud. This is what happens when the most scrutinized name in basketball runs into the one talent nobody can question. The night the highlight happened. It happened on November 5th, 2025, in a game between the San Antonio Spurs and the Los Angeles Lakers. Wembanyama caught the ball, pump-faked Rui Hachimura, drove the lane, and finished with a dunk. The player who rotated over to contest it was Bronny James. Wembanyama is listed at around 7'4". Bronny is listed at around 6'2" to 6'4". Wemby went up. Bronny went up with him, and the ball went through the rim anyway. The clip moved fast. Within hours, it was a highlight, a meme, and a talking point across social media. The framing wrote itself, the first overall pick of 2023 throwing one down on a second-round pick from 2024, on the same possession in the same frame. People did not need a caption. The two bodies in the air told the story for them. Afterward, Wembanyama was asked about the play. He said he did not notice that anyone had tried to block him. He was not asked specifically about Bronny, and he did not single Bronny out. He described the play as routine. That answer, more than the dunk itself, is part of why the headline exists. A 7'4" center saying he did not register the contest reads, to a lot of viewers, like a verdict on the player doing the contesting. This was not the only time the two had been on the floor together. They had matched up across multiple games, and Bronny was usually the smaller man being asked to deal with the taller one. On defense, Bronny held his ground in spots, drew the occasional offensive foul, and stayed in front when he could. On most of the highlights, though, Wembanyama came out on top because the matchup was built that way before either of them did anything. Bronny has been asked about it directly. When a reporter asked him what it is like to guard Wembanyama, his answer was short and plain.
What's it like guarding Wembanyama? It's something else for sure. I'm one of the smaller guys on the floor, guarding the tallest guy in the league, so it's definitely a challenge, but I'm up for anything.
That is the player describing his own situation. He is the smaller guy. Wemby is the tallest guy in the league. The job is hard. He is taking it anyway. There is no spin in it, and there is no excuse in it either. He named the gap before anyone else made him. It helps to lay out the basic facts of who these two are, because the contrast is built into their resumes. Wembanyama was the first overall pick in 2023. He won Rookie of the Year. By the 2025-26 season, he was a Defensive Player of the Year and an MVP-level scorer for the Spurs. Bronny was the 55th overall pick in 2024, a second-round selection, and through 2 seasons he has spent most of his time on the bench and in the G League. One was drafted to be the face of the league. The other was drafted to develop. When the two of them met on November 5th, the gap in their roles was already a matter of record, not opinion. The play also carried more weight because of who was watching. LeBron James, Bronny's father and teammate, was on the same Lakers roster. The dunk was not just Wembanyama over a rookie. It was Wembanyama over LeBron's son, in a Lakers uniform, in a nationally watched game. That detail is part of why the clip traveled as far as it did. It connected to a larger story about the James family that the audience already knew by heart. So here's what the title is built on, stated plainly. There is a play where Wembanyama dunked on Bronny. There is a quote where Wembanyama said he did not even notice the contest. There is a string of matchups where the size difference decided most of the outcomes. And there is Bronny himself on camera, acknowledging that he is the smaller man guarding the taller one. Put those 4 things in a row, and you have the raw material for Victor Wembanyama. Finally confirms what we all thought about Bronny James. What the title leaves out, for now, is the question of what we all thought actually was, and whether a dunk and a shrug add up to a confirmation of it. Those are the pieces we have to take apart one at a time, because the dunk did not happen in a vacuum. It landed on top of a story that had been running for more than a year, a story about how Bronny got into the league, what he has done since he got there, and who gets to say whether he belongs. Before November 5th, Bronny James was already the most argued over role player in the NBA. He was the son of the most famous player alive, drafted by his father's team, playing next to his father, in a league where almost nobody thought a 55th pick deserved that much airtime. The Wembanyama dunk did not start that argument. It walked into the middle of one that was already loud, and it gave one side inside of it a picture to point at. To see why one clip could feel like it settled anything, you have to go back to what people were saying long before Wembanyama ever rose up over him. You have to look at the belief that the headline calls what we all thought and where that belief came from. Because the dunk only confirms something if there was a something sitting there waiting to be confirmed. And there was. There absolutely was. The thing everyone already believed. The belief is older than the highlight, and it has a precise starting point, the 2024 NBA Draft, where the Los Angeles Lakers used the 55th overall pick on Bronny James. On paper, a late second-round flyer on a developmental guard is the most ordinary transaction in the sport. In reality, it was anything but. The Lakers were the team his father played for. His father had spoken openly for years about the dream of sharing an NBA floor with his son. So when the pick landed, an enormous slice of the basketball world reached the same conclusion at the same instant. This was not a scouting decision. This was a family wish granted by a franchise with a powerful incentive to grant it. That conclusion hardened into the dominant storyline of his career before he had logged a single meaningful minute. The whispers were brutal, and they came from inside the building as much as outside it. Plenty of scouts and executives had privately graded him as a player who was not yet NBA ready, a verdict that leaned heavily on a thin freshman season at USC, where he averaged 4.8 points per game and rarely looked like the most dangerous player on his own roster. The math was uncomfortable, and everyone could do it. Sub 5 points in college, a second-round selection, and a starting role in the most relentless media market in the league handed to him on draft night. The phrase that followed him everywhere was a single word, and it was not a kind one: nepotism. The criticism was not fringe. It came from the loudest, most credentialed voices in the room. Stephen A. Smith argued that the situation had set Bronny up for failure, framing the spotlight not as a gift, but as a trap, a stage built so tall that any stumble would be broadcast in high definition. Lakers general manager Rob Pelinka called the selection magical. Critics shot back that magic was a generous word for what looked, from the cheap seats, like an egregious flex of influence by the most powerful athlete on the planet. The two framings could not be reconciled, and the gap between them became the permanent weather system over Bronny's career. Layered underneath all of it was something far more serious than a draft debate. In July 2023, Bronny suffered cardiac arrest during a workout at USC, the result of a congenital heart defect. He recovered, was cleared, and returned to the floor, and the resilience he showed in coming back earned genuine, widespread admiration.
But the episode also became fuel for the colder voices, who folded a young man's medical scare into their ledger of reasons to doubt whether he should be in the league at all. It was the moment the scrutiny stopped being purely about basketball and started feeling, to many, like piling on. And the milestone at the center of it was, in the same breath, one of the most beautiful stories the sport has ever produced. When Bronny stepped onto the floor with his father, the two of them became the first father-son duo to play together in an NBA game, a sentence that had never been written in the league's entire history. Half the audience saw a fairy tale. The other half saw the clearest evidence yet that the fairy tale was the whole point, that the basketball was secondary to the storyline, and that a more deserving prospect had been quietly pushed aside so the narrative could be completed. That, in its essence, is what we all thought. Stripped of cruelty and stripped of sentiment, the belief was simple and durable, that Bronny James was in the NBA because of who his father is, not because of what he can do, and that the on-court product would never quite justify the attention. It was a belief about the gap between his fame and his game. Everything that came after, the dunk included, was read through that single lens. Here is the part that complicates the easy version of the story, though. Bronny himself never pretended the noise was not there, and he never crumbled under it. He has been openly aware that the whole world is watching and weighing in, that people see him as a curiosity rather than a player. His stated answer to all of it was not to argue his way into being a star. It was narrower and tougher than that. He wanted to become a defensive specialist, a perimeter pest, the kind of low-usage grinder who earns a uniform by making life miserable for the man he is guarding. He set the bar where he could actually reach it. So by the time Wembanyama elevated over him in November, the script was already written in everyone's head. One player was the consensus future of the league. The other was the most famous fringe player in basketball, carrying a last name like a backpack full of bricks. The dunk did not introduce that contrast. It illustrated it. And to understand why that illustration hit as hard as it did, you have to look at the numbers behind both men and at the chorus of voices that had been narrating the gap out loud long before the highlight ever existed. The numbers and the noise. Start with the scoreboard that never lies, the stat sheet. The distance between these two players in the 2025-26 season is not a debate, it is a chasm, and the figures are almost cartoonish when you set them side by side. Wembanyama poured in 25-0 points, 11-5 rebounds, 3-1 assists, and a league-leading 3-1 blocks per game across 64 games and roughly 29 minutes a night, shooting better than 51% from the floor. Bronny in the same season averaged 29 points, 0-5 rebounds, and 1-2 assists in about 9 minutes a night. Across 42 games, one man's player efficiency rating sat near 30, in the rarefied air reserved for MVP candidates. The others hovered around 9. The territory of a deep reserve still searching for a foothold. The contrast does not stop at counting stats. It deepens into something historic. Wembanyama did not merely play good defense. He authored a season for the ages, becoming the unanimous Defensive Player of the Year and, at age 22, the youngest ever to claim the award. His blocks led the league by a staggering margin, marking his third straight season at the top, a feat shared only with the immortals of rim protection. When he stepped on the floor, the Spurs' defense transformed from ordinary into elite, a swing of more than 10 points per 100 possessions that scouts and analysts treated as one of the most valuable individual fingerprints in the sport. Bronny's defensive ledger told the opposite tale, though not an unsalvageable one. His defensive rating sat near a rough 117.8. His advanced impact numbers landed in negative territory, and the smallness of his sample made every figure feel provisional. Yet the tools were visible in the flashes: quick feet, live hands, genuine effort, a willingness to fight over screens and bother ball handlers. The verdict on him was never that he lacked grit. It was that grit, in a league this size and this strong, only takes a 6'2" guard so far. That gulf, laid bare in black and white, gave the skeptics all the ammunition they needed, and they did not hold their fire. The most blistering voice belonged to former #1 pick Kwame Brown, who dismantled the hype with a bluntness that left no room for sentiment.
We got high school players better than Bronny. Absolutely got high school players better than Bronny. Bronny was never the best high school player on his team. He was never the best college player on his team. And he still gets 12 shots in a preseason game where everybody's auditioning, where nobody normally passes the ball.
It was a savage line of reasoning, and it cut to the heart of the merit argument. A player who was never the best on his own bench, somehow commanding the ball, and the spotlight, ahead of men scrapping for the same roster spot. Brown's complaint was not really about 12 shots. It was about the invisible hand he believed was placing the ball in those hands. The chorus did not end with the harsh voices. It also included 2 players who voted Bronny in as an all-star starter in early 2026, a gesture so out of step with his production that it detonated across podcasts and timelines, drawing disbelief from analysts who could not square a sub-3-point scorer with an all-star ballot. Whether it was a joke, a sign of peer affection, or pure mischief, it poured gasoline on the exact fire the skeptics were warming their hands over. The sense that Bronny received a magnitude of attention his game had not earned, and yet, woven through the criticism was a thread of something gentler, even protective, and it came from one of the most decorated big men ever to play. Shaquille O'Neal, asked who most deserved relief from the public's glare, named Bronny without hesitation, and reframed the entire pile-on as something uglier than basketball analysis.
It's professional jealousy, which is understood. So of course, when you got this young kid coming in, getting all the pub, you're going to feel some type of way, and you're going to test them out. You want to see if they really can take it.
Shaq went further, calling Bronny a great kid who only wanted to play, and wishing aloud that the scrutiny would simply lift off the young man's shoulders. It was a fascinating split screen. The numbers screamed mismatch. The harshest critics screamed nepotism. And one of the game's giants quietly insisted that what looked like analysis was often just the oldest ritual in sports, veterans testing whether a hyped newcomer can survive the heat. All of it was already in the air, swirling and unresolved when the cameras turned to Wembanyama himself. What Wembanyama actually said. Here is where the headline meets its source material, because if Victor Wembanyama truly confirmed what we all thought, the proof would have to live in his own words. So it is worth slowing down and listening to exactly what came out of his mouth in the moments people now treat as a verdict. The first piece is the dunk itself and the comment that trailed it. Asked about the play, Wembanyama said he had not even noticed that someone tried to contest him. Read one way, it is devastating, a 7-4 force admitting that the defender at his chest registered as nothing at all. Read another way, it is the least personal sentence imaginable. He did not say Bronny was bad. He did not say Bronny did not belong. He said, in effect, that from his altitude the floor looks empty. The cruelty, if there is any, is supplied entirely by the listener, who knows the defender's name and fills in the insult that Wembanyama never spoke. The second piece is the line that gave 1,000 thumbnaps their fuel. Wembanyama on the subject of LeBron James, pressed on whether he would feel emotional when the greatest of his era finally walks away. The Frenchman answered with a candor that read as ice to some and as simple honesty to others.
LeBron's been playing in the NBA your whole life. When he retires, be honest, are you going to shed a tear?
No. You asked me to be honest. I'm not going to shed a tear, but it is going to be very weird for sure.
Notice who that quote is even about. It is about LeBron, the father, not Bronny, the son. Wembanyama was asked whether the retirement of a legend would move him to tears, and he gave a young man's unsentimental shrug. The internet stitched that shrug onto the Bronny narrative because the two stories share a last name and a highlight, and because a clip of Wemby looking unbothered slots perfectly into a video titled around confirmation. But strip away the editing and the implication, and you are left with a 22-year-old saying he will not cry over a rival's retirement. That is not a scouting report on Bronny. It is barely even about him. The third piece does not come from Wembanyama at all, and that is the quiet tale of this whole saga. The most pointed commentary about whether Bronny belongs came on Podcast P with Paul George in a conversation about a tweet from LeBron himself, claiming his son was already better than some current NBA players. The response on the show was raw and unfiltered.
Being in the league so long, you realize how many don't love the game of basketball, who take it for granted, who feel so entitled, and thinking they just should be playing because they homeboy told them they nice.
What is it, 450 of us? It's a good 75 to 100.
Stinks.
That is a startling concession, and it cuts in Bronny's favor in a backhanded way. The argument is not that Bronny is good. It is that the league is wide enough and uneven enough that LeBron's claim about his son outplaying the bottom rung is not absurd on its face. When you really count the men who do not love the game, who coast, who feel entitled, the floor of the NBA is lower than the casual fan assumes. In that framing, better than some NBA players is less a celebration of Bronny than an indictment of the 75 to 100 at the bottom. And then there's Bronny's own framing of the matchup, the words that should have been the centerpiece of any honest confirmation video and almost never are. He never ducked the size difference, never pretended the assignment was fair, and never asked for sympathy. He stated the obvious and then stated his intent. He is the smallest man on the floor, drawing the tallest, and he is up for it anyway. So tally the actual evidence. Wembanyama said he did not notice a contest. Wembanyama said he would not cry over LeBron's retirement. A podcast guest said the league's bottom tier is genuinely thin, and Bronny said guarding a giant is hard, but he welcomes it. Nowhere in that pile is the sentence the headline promises. The moment where Victor Wembanyama turns to the camera and confirms that Bronny James does not belong. The dunk is real. The contrast is real. The quote that nails Bronny to the wall, the one the title is selling, simply does not exist in the footage, which leaves only one question worth answering. The verdict. So, did Victor Wembanyama finally confirm what we all thought about Bronny James? The honest answer, after walking through every clip, every stat, and every quote, is no, not in the way the headline wants you to believe. There is no moment on record where Wembanyama looks into a microphone and brands Bronny a fraud, a charity case, or a player who has no business in the league. The man has been, by every available account, professional and focused on his own game, declining again and again to wade into the drama that swirls around the James family. The confirmation is not a statement. It is a dunk, a shrug, and an audience eager to read a sermon into both. What actually happened is subtler and, in a way, more interesting. Wembanyama did not confirm a belief about Bronny. He embodied the contrast that makes the belief feel true. He is the organic generational talent, the unanimous Defensive Player of the Year on a Hall of Fame arc. Bronny is the developmental guard fighting for 9 minutes a night under the heaviest surname in sports. Put those two trajectories in the same highlight, and the human brain does the rest. It mistakes a vivid picture for a spoken truth. The headline is built on that reflex, and it is, at bottom, interpretive clickbait dressed up as a quote. And here is the part the dunk video never shows you, the other half of the ledger that complicates the easy verdict. While the skeptics narrated his ceiling, Bronny's own peers were quietly raising his floor. Draymond Green, never one to soften a take, went out of his way to credit Bronny for his playoff minutes and to call out the haters directly, marveling at the sight of a father and son sharing a postseason series. Shaq, even while wishing the scrutiny away, framed the whole ordeal as a rite of passage every newcomer must survive. These are not soft voices. They are men who earned the right to be harsh and chose not to be. The history piled up alongside the criticism too, and it is genuinely unprecedented. LeBron and Bronny connected for the first father-son assist the NBA has ever recorded, a moment the league itself stopped to commemorate. They became the first father-son duo to share an NBA playoff floor, an experience LeBron called the craziest thing that has ever happened in his career. Whatever you believe about how Bronny arrived, the things he has done since arriving have never been done before by anyone. The fairest reading is that two things are true at once, and the headline only wants you to hold one of them. Yes, the talent gap between Wembanyama and Bronny James is enormous, undeniable, and on full display every time they meet. And yes, Bronny remains a developmental project whose long-term NBA future is genuinely uncertain, with a guaranteed season ahead in 2026 to 27 and everything to prove once his father's influence fades. But no, Victor Wembanyama did not confirm any of it with his words, because he never spoke the verdict. He let a dunk speak, and the internet put words in its mouth. Bronny, for his part, has answered the only way that has ever made sense for him. Not with a clapback, not with a stat line he cannot produce, but with the quiet declaration that he intends to become a defensive menace and grind out a role on effort alone. He named his own gap before anyone dunked it home. He looked at the tallest man in the league, called himself the smallest, and said he was up for it anyway. It is worth remembering, too, that the NBA has seen this exact movie many times, and it does not always end the way the loudest voices predict. The league is full of second-generation players who walked in under a famous name and a cloud of doubt, from Austin Rivers playing for his own father to Tim Hardaway Jr. and Gary Trent Jr. clawing out long, useful careers as shooters and defenders. Some of them never silenced the nepotism talk entirely. Most of them simply outlasted it, one role player season at a time, until the conversation moved on. Bronny entered with thinner college numbers than almost any of them, which makes his climb steeper, but the blueprint for survival is well worn, and it has nothing to do with becoming a star. It has to do with becoming useful. That is the genuinely open question the dunk did nothing to answer. Bronny is signed through a guaranteed 2026 to 27 season with a team option beyond it, which means the real test arrives only when his father's presence stops bending the spotlight. If he develops a reliable three-point stroke and a defense that travels, the kind of two-way reliability that keeps a player on a roster on merit, the nepotism story fades into a footnote. If he does not, the skeptics get the ending they have been writing in advance. Either way, that verdict is years out, and it will be delivered by box scores and empty arenas, not by a single poster dunk in a regular season game. So what did Wembanyama really confirm? Only that he is exactly what everyone hoped he would be, a force of nature reshaping games by himself. The thing we all thought about Bronny James was never actually his to confirm. That verdict still belongs to the seasons ahead, to the development that happens out of the spotlight, and to Bronny himself. The dunk closed a possession. It did not close the book. Love this video? Click on this card for more.